full house today. I am happy to see so much people interested in our next artist. So next artist is well known about his very special and own sound. We say the Nolly sound. I think everyone knows what is the Nolly sound. And in the next hour, half an hour, we can hear the exact technique and all insights in the clinic. And I stopped talking because you are not here because of me, but you are here to see a great artist. Please welcome with a loud applause for Adam Nolly Getgood.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Hey, everybody. Is this working? Cool. Wow. There's quite a lot of you here. And some familiar faces, actually. It's cool to see. Right. I'm not going to start with talking. I think I'm going to start with playing, actually. So we'll kick things off that way. And then, once I've done some playing, I've got plenty to say, but I'd also really love to make this question focused, because I can talk all day long and maybe say an interesting thing or two, but it's going to be a lot better for you guys if you have specific questions. Now's your chance to come out with them. And obviously, I know for a lot of you, German's your first language. If anyone's feeling kind of embarrassed about asking questions in English, please just find a way, like ask someone that speaks English to translate or something. I'd love to hear from you all and give you my answers. Cool, let's get straight into it. Make sure we're making noise. Cool. So that's actually the first time I've ever performed that track. It's the only Periphery song that starts with only bass. I thought it could be appropriate. A little bit nerve-wracking just doing bass on your own with a hi-hat to start and making sure you stay tight and everything, but hopefully it wasn't too bad. Yeah, I've really wanted to perform that track for quite a long time. I figured what I'm going to do in this is I definitely want to talk about the basses, the technique, but also maybe just a little bit about each song, kind of little things about them that are tricky or interesting. But again, I really, really would like you guys to ask as many questions as you want to get through. So, first things first, we're here mostly because of Dingwall. Anybody here own a Dingwall bass? Cool, that's quite a few of you. Is it an NG series by any chance? Keep your hand up. Yeah, cool, nice, thank you. I do like these basses. And yeah, just out of interest, is there anyone here that isn't a bassist? You want to put up your hands if you're not a bassist and you're here for kind of other subversive questioning? Yep, cool, there's a few of you. And are you guys like into mixing and mastering kind of stuff? That tends to be a lot of questions. So all questions are welcome. Please do feel free to ask those questions too. We can make the bassist fall asleep. So Absalom, that is it's a very early song by Misha, who founded Periphery. That was a song that came out on his SoundClick, which was called Bulb, which was the name of his band at the time, but people kind of started calling him Bulb. And I remember hearing that for the first time, probably in 2007 or something when it was on MySpace. And I remember thinking that intro pattern actually reminded me of, if you guys know that hip-hop group Jurassic 5, you guys know Jurassic 5? There's a song called Playground, and like the flow is actually really similar. I later asked Misha, and that's totally not the inspiration, but that intro kind of, if you know the song and you think about it, it's actually quite similar. I actually tend to think that some of the best rhythms tend to be rhythms that kind of would work as a kind of rap in a way, at least when they're around this tempo. I think we kind of superimpose words and syllables onto rhythms, and sometimes the ones which work really well in a rap context, if you actually just imagine them being chugged, could probably be the basis of not just a Gent song, but a whole Gent album. So top tip for you guys. The main riff, I mean, obviously I'm just playing that low C for most of the time. It takes quite a long time before it moves off it. But there are some kind of subtle changes being done to the rhythm. So first, the first version of it doesn't go like that. So like when I'm playing that in the start, it's really emphatic. And I'm not muting the notes with my right hand, so I'm not kind of palm muting fifth. A really specific hand placement that you have to find kind of to not catch up. There's like a certain spot where it just sounds like you're hitting like a heavy object with a blunt kind of hammer, and that's what you're going for. So that's the intro. Then we've got the next version of it, which I think I played in the wrong spot when I just played it. But that's doubling what the guitars are doing, and that I am kind of palm muting to get a really short kind of cut off and everything. And then as it evolves into close to the first kind of pre-chorus, there's no muting at all. Yeah. So instead of... and then later on we get the same rhythm with some notes applied to it and everything. But that one rhythm is pretty much the key to the whole song. There's only really one kind of tricky bit, which I would have definitely punched in a lot on the record to get right, but that kind of tapping section. That's pretty much the only thing that has stopped me from wanting to perform that live, but I think I've drilled it enough that it came out okay. Cool. Are there any questions about that song, out of interest, if anyone wants to be brave? I'm very happy to break down anything from it as well. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I was just playing like octaves. That's something I quite like to do. The guitars are doing like a really nice rich chord, like they're catching like the major third on the second time around, and at the same time you've got this like kind of Phrygian dominant thing going on. So the first time around I'm going after the rhythm, making sure I'm catching the flat first there, flat second rather. But then yeah, I thought it could be quite fun to do actual octaves, which I think are underused in bass. Like why not? If your bass is really nicely in tune so you don't get like a clash, it just sounds like a grand piano player might use their left hand to play a full octave. Like why wouldn't you do that? That's more debatable. predictable. I went for it. And then I think a key with bass chords is to not put too many like close intervals in them. So here, like I wouldn't play a third on the low string. Well, I can't in this tuning, but like that doesn't sound anywhere near as good as. But there's this really wide interval. I think there's really nothing wrong with using chords, and certainly playing live with periphery, I would. If I wanted something to be really emphatic, I wouldn't hold back from playing an octave. At the worst case scenario, people don't notice, and it just sounds like you're playing the root note. So there's not too much to lose. And I mean, I also would have recorded that on a 5-string bass. So this is in a drop C tuning. So I would have had another octave below this G, down below that. So there are certain things on the recording. If you hear, I'm able to hit a root note that's an octave lower than I can on this, which, in my opinion, like I love playing a 4-string bass. I love how nimble it is. It's not really worth it just for a couple of notes to be able to hit that low string, I would say. Especially something where, you know, I want to really be able to lay into that bottom string. I don't want to have to worry about catching another string there all the time. I mean, you can make it work, but especially in this kind of scenario with the adrenaline going a little bit more, like anything you can do to improve your accuracy odds is probably a win. So, you know, there was actually one point where for some reason I decided to play a power chord. Pretty good. You know, that would have been one of the spots where on the record I would have played the octave below the root note. You know, it would have been back here somewhere. But playing a power chord does kind of give it a bit of that vibe. Again, why not do it on bass? As long as you've got a tone that isn't like way too kind of fuzzy sounding, and perhaps if you've got a bit of compression going into it as well. So compressor before the amp will kind of hold it in place when you're playing a few more notes and it's kind of getting a bit louder, prevent it from overloading the amp too much. Yeah. Cool. Were there any other questions on that? Yep. No, I'm an octave lower. I'm fine and dandy. They can worry about the space. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, so the 3 guitar player thing, you have to think is just the best thing that they could do to be able to convey all of the guitar parts on the record live. The songs are not arranged for 3 guitars. There might be a riffy section where there's just 2 rhythm guitars, and so the 3 of them are playing in unison live. I'm talking about on the recording, there's only 2. But then there might be a chorus where there's the main riff, there might be a version with an octaver on it, there might be a chordal version of it, there might be a lead, there might be a harmony of the lead. It's like, there's so many layers. They thought at least if they have one person to be able to play layers and still have 2 people to play rhythm guitars, that would work live without kind of needing a whole like kind of orchestra section of guitars to do everything. So, you know, even in the live context, there's not that many times that all 3 guitars are playing the riff. So most of the time it's kind of like just, you know, 2 guitars to the side and me in the middle, and it works pretty well. Cool. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I've just realized I'm supposed to be repeating these answers for the people on stream because they can't hear you guys, so I'm going to repeat your answer. So your question, rather. So your question was about how I got the tone on Absalom. Are you talking about the recorded version of it? Yeah, so that was all done in the box. Yeah, I think. No, that's not true. It was mostly done in the box, but the first thing I did was I was recording through a dark glass pedal, a B7K, which had a fairly light amount of gain on it, not super distorted, just kind of shaping the DI a bit. And that was going straight into Cubase, because we were recording on Misha's computer. And then I really finagled with it during the mix. In retrospect, there's aspects of that bass tone that I don't particularly like, but it's pretty iconic, I guess. It's just a bit fizzy to me, like, you know. Also, on the intro, and especially when the bass kind of comes back, playing that riff like 2/3 of the way through the song as a transition, there's actually quite a lot of reverb on the bass. And that's something which I wouldn't normally do in the mix, because it tends to make things sound really cloudy. But if you listen to the intro, you'll hear there's like a kind of room reverb. I thought just because an isolated recording bass tone just sounds quite clinical and unexciting, and I thought it could be cool if it had a bit of a feeling like you were hearing it, maybe a bit like you guys are hearing it now in a space like this. And then the tone that I'm using today, which I think is better, is a capture of the pedal that I made with Dark Glass. So with Dark Glass Electronics a few years ago, we designed a pedal called the Atom, and I dialed in like a whole recording chain around it. I ran that pedal through some outboard gear and captured it on this Neural DSP Quad Cortex Mini. So they've got this new version 2 captures that are extremely good at capturing even multi-band distortion. So this has got kind of a clean low end and a distorted high end. And this capture software can figure that out, basically, which is quite amazing. So I'm using my pedal, but in captured form, so that I can then chuck some other processing in around it if I want to. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the question is about how many layers. Are you talking about guitar layers? Would you find, like how many tracks am I dealing with, kind of thing, on a periphery song? Well, something happens with periphery that happens with a lot of clients these days, which is when I'm getting to the mix, they've already condensed some of it down. So it's hard to say because I'm working on my end in Logic. They might have already combined a synth sound that was made up with 5 different layers into a single sound. So but even then, I mean, most songs would be pushing 100 easy. That's not the most that I ever deal with, and bear in mind probably about 25 of those are drums, just the multi-mics on the drums. But it would be quite common to have like 8 guitar layers in choruses, that kind of thing. So something that periphery does a lot, actually, is there will be a guitar doubling what is the bass line. So there might be a certain riff, which has got chords and stuff going on, but then there'll be another guitar playing often palm muted and solid 8s, a bit like I do on bass, the same line, which ends up being the bass line as well. So actually, the bass kind of gets connected to those, which are quieter in the mix, which is really cool, actually. It's quite a cool way of doing it. And sometimes those guitars have got an octave pedal on them as well, so they've got notes which are down in the bass range as well. So, I mean, you can factor that in. That immediately adds another pair of guitars, and then there might be loads and loads of layers, and sometimes layering of sound as well. That means that it just ends up as huge stacks of stuff. But as much as I can, if this is a kind of question of like, how does that get dealt with? As much as I can, I'm trying to condense it down and see things that are combinations of sound as one sound, because otherwise it's just way too much to keep track of for anybody. Cool. I'd like to talk for a moment about picking technique, which is something I talk about quite a lot in these clinics that I do. So hopefully that's going to be interesting to you guys. You haven't heard it all before. Because I think so much of getting the really kind of fun-sounding, nice quality of a bass comes down to how you play it. And as an instrument, it's something which you can approach in so many different ways, and I've kind of found my way of doing it. And there's a couple of things that I do which are pretty well known at this point that I think really contribute to my sound, and are the kinds of things that when people pick up my bass, it kind of actually does sound like them, which is a bit of a thing that people say, like, oh, you can play their instrument and you'd never sound like them about whoever. But actually, there are certain things. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is actually the setup of the basses. So we got into Thomann today. This is my bass that I flew out with, but the other 2 basses I'm going to play are stock from Thomann here. And I kind of retuned them to the tunings that I need, and I did like a quick setup now that I've kind of shifted the tuning. And so I thought it could be interesting just to talk about what I'm looking for in the setup, not just for the playability, but for the sound. Because so much of the sound that you're hearing is kind of revolving around this really bright percussive attack. And you just don't get that if the action's too high. So you do hear people saying that, if you're picking a bass hard, like you need to have the action high so the note can resonate. For me, what I'm looking for is to allow the string to hit the frets quite hard on the pick, and then to resonate pretty cleanly after there. So the trick there is kind of playing the neck relief off the string height. So the trick which I use, which was shown to me by a luthier friend many years ago, it's been very, very solid for me, like a rule of thumb for guitars and bass. If you want to know how to set it up really well, get a low action and that kind of sound, which I also like on guitar, is I'll hold down the 1st fret. You can use a capo for that if you want to. And the 16th fret. Don't know why it was the 16th. That's what he told me to do, so that's what I do. On the same string. So I've now isolated this area of the string. And then, however I can, with my little finger, I'm just going to pluck that string. And ideally, I know it's going to be impossible for you to hear, but ideally, you want to hear a fairly clean note there. It's not buzzing against the frets too much. If you want a guitar to have or a bass to have a really wide open sound, then you want to try and find the point where there's no buzz at all, the lowest possible action. So if it's buzzing, then you need to loosen the truss a little bit to put some relief into it, so that then that note can ring freely between these 2 points. And if you want to go lower, then you tighten it. I like on a bass to actually hear quite a lot of kind of metallic fret buzz. I don't know if you guys can hear it. Is that coming through? It's actually quite hard to do. like this. It's a fairly clean note out of that. So what I'm aiming for is a slightly choked note there. That's going to mean that the neck is at a point where the relief is about as little as it can be to still get like a playable action. And you do that across all the strings. You can obviously only adjust the truss rod globally, but if you're finding that one string in particular has a particularly bad buzz, then you know that it's probably something you need to get a tech to look at the frets, because maybe there's a high fret or something there. And then you can go and adjust the individual string heights from here on the bridge to get as low a playing action as possible, because I want the bass to really have that loud percussive sound that you hopefully hear unplugged here. And I know it's slightly obscured by the pick, but you do actually hear like an almost slapped like kind of sound, which is the string rebounding off the fret wire, and that's kind of what gives it that really nice bright attack. But when you then distort and chuck through compression, comes out sounding really aggressive. Like the other thing which I love to talk about are the picks that I use. So these are the same picks that I've always used on bass. These actually are still from my days touring in Periphery over 10 years ago, because they gave me a huge amount of them, and I don't actually play bass that much, so I'm still working through my Periphery stock. These are the equivalent of the orange Jim Dunlop Tortex picks, so 0.6 mil, really quite thin. Basically, the thinnest you can go without really losing the note of the string, because the thinner the pick, generally, the less it tends to emphasize the fundamental note. A really, really light string tends to mostly really light pick tends to mostly exaggerate the higher harmonics and less of the fundamental. And that's one way that, de-exaggerating the fundamental and then concentrating more on the harmonics is a way that we can get the distorted sound to sound a bit more guitar-like and really harmonically rich. So 0.6 mil pick, there's a lot of flex in there. And this is doing a few things. One of them is that it allows me to pick with a lot of pick depth. So what I mean is that like the pick can go physically down into the strings quite far, and yet I can still push it through because the pick flexes. If I tried doing that with a hard pick, I'd just get completely stuck against the string. And having that deep pick depth means that when I pick a note, there is a moment of silence and string scraping that occurs, because the first thing that happens is the pick kind of gets buried into the string, and then it needs to get out, and then it gradually will kind of flick over the top of the string, like that. It's me really exaggerating it. That is really key, I think, to getting a cool sound with a pick, because if I pick just with the tip of the pick, actually sounds pretty cool, but it has a more of like a yeah, scratch all that. I'm going to go and work on what I'm going to say before I come back. No, but if I pick really hard with a deep pick depth, there is that kind of like you're rubbing a rubber balloon, when you get a balloon and you kind of rub it and it goes, so it's kind of like that at the front of the note. And I really like how that sounds. So that's a really huge part of why I use the thin pick, is to be able to get that pick depth, which then drives this really interesting sound. Something else to notice is that you don't need to pick from way up here to pick hard. Always think of a pick as like you are drawing a bowstring and then releasing the arrow. Like you can pick super hard from no distance at all. You can just push the string quite a long way and release it, and that's where the loud volume comes from. So even unplugged, like that's like no run up at all. I can get a really loud pick off the string. So all the focus is on just catching the string, pushing it as far as the pick will allow, and then the pick on its own is going to release it. And that allows you to have a really consistent quality, because the pick is defining when the string gets released, and that allows the consistency of all of your picks to be really even. One final thing to say about that is that space between the pick hitting the string and the note coming out is crucial to the timing. So like how tight you play, where on the beat you play, because there is a built-in delay there, basically. So I find that for me to pocket, like for me to find the exact kind of right space around the kick drum when I pick, I'm actually, if I look closely on a grid, I'm often making contact with the string slightly ahead of the beat, kind of adding like an almost kind of flammed sound to the kick drum. And then the note isn't releasing until kind of well after the kick drum. So this is me kind of looking at it visually in a DAW. And a lot of that's coming from the pick, because that's basically defining that gap. The pick gap, sorry, the pick depth, the flexibility of the pick, and then kind of that working with my technique to sound a certain way. Cool. I feel like I've been talking a lot. Does anyone have any questions before I do another song? Yeah. So the question is about the role of scale length, not just in playability, but in terms of sound as well. So yeah, these Dingwall basses, they use what was called the Novak system. So, excuse me. So it's basically like if you apply grand piano logic to, or piano in general, logic to a bass. So the bass strings are longer than the treble strings. And then to make that make sense, the frets have to be on an angle so that you still intonate correctly. So I often think, like, people refer to these as like fanned fret instruments, but that's kind of the thing the eye is drawn to. But I like to think of it more as like a multi-scale or like an increasing scale instrument. There's a couple of things that happen when you make the string longer. So naturally, you spread the overtones out a bit more along the string, and it kind of has this effect of less bunched sounding mid-range. It kind of feels more open and piano-like. And then the other thing which you can't really separate is that if you want the same note out of a longer string as you're getting out of a shorter string, you either have to put, well, you use a lot less tension, basically. So the result is that you can use a lighter string to achieve the same pitch that you would need a much thicker string for on a regular bass. So with the Dingwalls, what's really nice is I don't have to use an ultra-thick string to be able to get a low tuning out of the bottom string. And that in itself also means that the tone is a bit brighter. So there's kind of a double whammy of positivity there, which is great. Was there a specific thing within that you wanted to know about with the extended scale? Yep. Yep. So the question's about how long do you have to make the scale length on a guitar specifically? On a guitar, yeah, to be able to tune really low. So there's another thing which is going on, which is a bit counterintuitive, but relatively speaking, when you make the string longer, you're making the pickups smaller. Like if you take a long guitar and a short one, and then you kind of blow them up so that they're the same length, actually you've made the pickups and the magnetic field off the pickups that much bigger. So as you make the guitar longer, the pickups are getting less and less information from the string. They're getting fewer overtones that are spread out over the string. And that in itself poses a difficulty. So my personal preference on guitar is not to mess with it too much, because I like how a 6-string in 25.5-inch scale sounds most of the time, in terms of like the overtones that the pickups are picking up. And as soon as you start to extend it, you get really cool sounds, but I guess I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I like a guitar to kind of have that mid-range grind that I'm used to. I certainly think that by the time you get up to like 30 inches on a guitar, you really probably should only need 4 strings, because those top strings are going to be really, really bright and abrasive sounding in a way that I personally don't like. But that's me. You're asking the wrong person on that, because I'm a bit more traditional. Cool. I'll take one more question and then I'll play again. So the question is basically, can you compensate for the thinner sound you might get out of the longer scale length by actually keeping with a thicker string as a tonal adjustment? I don't know. These things, it's all a system. So if you do that, you're going to have a really tense string. It's not going to move very much, and that in turn is going to lead to reduced output from the pickup. I don't know. It might help. It might help a little bit. But if that's what well, yeah, I don't know. You could experiment with it. It might be a cool sound, but that wouldn't be what I would typically do. You do see it. Like traditionally, baritone guitars have really thick strings on them. Often, I think, thicker than is necessary to have the same tension that you'd have in standard tuning. So it's definitely a thing. But for me, you're kind of, you're sidestepping the point, really, of having a longer scale. I don't often find that multi-scale is necessary on a guitar, frankly. I think it's really necessary even on a 4-string bass, especially a 5-string. But on a guitar, I think you have to be pushing into like low-tuned 7-string or 8-string territory before that starts to outweigh the negatives, I think. Cool, I'm going to play another song. This is good. We've got loads of questions. All right, I'm going to play another song which completely confuses everyone in Periphery because it's the most popular song on Spotify. None of us thought it should be. It's quite an odd outlier in the Periphery set, but yeah, you guys like it, so we're going to play it. It's called Marigold. Once I click on it. Cool, so that's that song, Marigold. The working title for that was Cleonasical. I think what's tricky about that song is probably the timing until you get it. Like, there's a lot of it that's in 7, and then as the themes develop, it's kind of like 7 and then like a bar of 4/4 as well. And it's kind of like just trusting that you are actually on the one which is the 4, so that you don't end up kind of looping back on the wrong note, you know? But I think for what it's worth, it's like a very natural sounding 7, and I've seen plenty of people say they don't really feel that as an odd time signature. So I think my favorite bit in that song, and actually a part where crowds go really crazy, which again none of us anticipated, is that when it comes back with the kind of heavy, the riff, that one, the wrong notes, but yeah, something like that. That's always a really great vibe, and I kind of almost wish that the song did that twice, because it's really fun to play. So cool. Any questions about that song? No? Oh, yeah.
Mixing bass question.
Okay, yeah, mixing bass, sure.
How are you creating room in the mix? So I've watched all the YouTube videos and made a living of it. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah.
But you're not talking often about how you're using reverbs and stuff like that. So are you using free master reverbs where everything goes in to create space, or how do you do it?
So the question is about making space in mixes. Are you talking specifically about bass? I guess not. Everything. Yeah. I don't use that much reverb. I think when I use reverb, it tends to be like quite. If I'm like, yeah, I really need to put reverb on something, I usually want it to be heard. I'm not one of the mixers that's like, reverb should be kind of like, if you would notice if it got muted, but otherwise you wouldn't notice it. I think I tend to use more like delays, so like hard delays on stuff if I want a bit of space. Something that I really like to do is to run like an echo into a reverb. So have a reverb on the echo itself, so that the echo doesn't have like a really hard edge to it. And that's something that you see a lot, like you see in some of the patches on the old like 80s hardware, or the ways that guys with mixing consoles will run things. They might have their delay set up ready to go, but it's actually running into a reverb as well. That kind of thing I think can go a really long way, because what I don't like is when something just sounds obviously like roomy. When it's in the context of a mix, you kind of want things to sound dense, and if something has like a kind of weirdly kind of comb filtery room character because of the reverb, it tends to really jump out at you. Now that could be something cool if you want it, if you want that kind of effect. But most of the time when I'm using reverbs, yeah, it's either something which is quite clean and long, or on a vocal I might use a little bit of the kind of subtle reverb, but usually it will be fed by a delay, so that it's kind of delayed from the sound, and also it's got the kind of interesting repeats going on with the ambience, if that makes sense. I think so. If the question is about depth, like I think depth is a lot more about layering different volumes of things. Like, obviously we perceive sounds as further away when they're quieter. It can be hard if you don't have great monitoring. So sometimes when you suddenly listen to something on great monitors, there's a sense of depth. And I think it's usually because the speakers are kind of able to resolve the really quiet stuff at the same time as the loud stuff. So there can be a band playing, and then you can kind of almost like peer with your ears into the mix and kind of see the delay trails bouncing around in the background, or like a particular layer or a little percussion element in the background. And to me, that's what creates depth. Reverb can create a sense of space, but that's not exactly the same thing. Now, if there's only a couple of instruments, then yeah, reverb is what's creating that quiet stuff that's in the background that gives it a sense of depth. But if you've got dense mix going on already and you chuck a load of reverb on it, you're going to have to make that reverb pretty loud to kind of compete with everything, and then it's up front, and now you're just washing everything right at the front rather than creating that sense of depth. So I guess that's where I find delays work a little bit better. But does that make sense about depth as a concept? Yeah? I think depth always felt like this kind of mystical black magic thing that people would talk about, and I'd be like, does that have depth? But I think once I kind of defined it in that way, it's like, oh, it's quiet stuff and loud stuff at the same time, mixed in the way that you can hear it all. That tends to kind of demystify a little bit and make it a bit easier to achieve. And for sure, there's certain recordings, like there's a particular song by Jacob Collier that I like to put on to demonstrate that, because it's got really dry drums, and there's a lot of space in it, and there's like these super, super quiet little tinkly noises that are panning around behind, and like on some systems you just can't even hear them. And on a really great system, the kind of mastering level, is you can just see them constantly kind of moving around, even behind the band. So that's the kind of thing which I define as depth rather than reverb. Make sense? Cool. Anyone else got a question? Yeah.
It's kind of a little bit a career-based question.
Sure.
I was just curious, how did you start out, like with this whole mixing thing and periphery? I think you met online, Misha, of a program in a forum. But how did you like start out getting mixed, like learning it, finding people that wanted like you mixing their music? What was your journey like?
So the question is about kind of how I got into working in audio as a mixer. And yeah, look, I mean, I'm super, super lucky, really, because being in periphery is what enabled me to have a career as a mixer as well, because I kind of became the de facto guy. If it wasn't on like the first record, I was there the whole time, and then quite quickly more and more responsibility got on my shoulders. And you know, that certainly gave me opportunities that I wouldn't have had if I was not in periphery. Like I think an album that kind of was a breakout for me into like working on another band and being fairly big was the Animals as Leaders record, Joy of Motion. And there's just no doubt that I got that gig purely because I was in periphery and the guys were all friends and they're like, oh, you should get Nolly to do it, you know. So I kind of feel like I'm not the best person to ask because I think it's something that's really hard to replicate. You know, it's a lot of luck involved, and I'm super grateful for that. What I do see as a mistake for people trying to stand out is, I mean, it's a real cliche, but going for quantity over quality. All it takes, maybe this is something that's an analogy to what happened to me, was like, it only takes 1 or 2 jobs where you deal with it professionally and people like you to open a door to working with like much better clients. And it's not that doing enough really bad jobs with local bands is somehow going to add up to like, oh, now that equals working with one good band on your CV. It's like, no, if your what's the word? If your work as a whole doesn't contain any like really great productions, then it's really unlikely that you're going to get hired by a big band. So what I did do was I mostly just worked on my own band, Red Sea Spire at the time's music, and I did little mix tests, like I post them on SoundCloud, and I just like do like a minute, a couple of riffs with a new plugin, just kind of doing a new mix from scratch. And I would just repeat that over and over again. That's kind of an analogy for a lot of what I've done in, you know, professionally. It's like I'll often practice not on a client's time, and just kind of practice and run, rinse, repeat those things over and over again, so that when I am in a situation where I then am working with a client who is on the same wavelength, it's like I'm actually really experienced, even if I haven't done it with a client before. I'm not kind of, it's not a trial and error thing with them. So I guess the advice which I'm getting to there is, as much as you can work on your own music and create the best sounding music you can, even if it's just like a throwaway riff, I mean, it needs to be good enough to be able to sound good. But if you just practice recording like an intro and a verse of this idea that you've got and just practice doing it a whole lot of different ways, working on your ear for tuning, because I feel like that's a huge part of getting something to sound really professional. Like, can you track your guitars and your bass really in tune, really in time, and kind of learn the tools that way? That can actually serve as a really good, is that word that I forgot earlier again? I can't remember it now. Portfolio, that's the word. That can serve as a really good portfolio in a way that just doing client work for bands that are never going to kind of catch the attention of bigger bands will. So I'm trying to think how to give something which is actually actionable on your side. But I think just focusing on quality is really it, because yeah, all it takes is one person saying to a potential contact, like, oh yeah, he really works well, he really cares about quality, and for them to hear the quality in what you've done, for them to be like, oh, we should give him a shot, as well as being a nice person as well. I think that can't be overstated. Like, if they say, oh, he's really quality focused and he's a nice guy, then that can open a surprising amount of doors. Because while the old classic, like, you know, working as an assistant in a studio and then the head engineer's sick and then you get to take the role, like, that doesn't really happen anymore. But there are occasionally time conflicts or abilities to come in and work as an assistant on like a big project that could really give you a leg up in a career. So does that provide enough of an answer? I feel like it's quite washy, but cool. That's good to know. Yeah, my pleasure.
You find yourself having to replace the low-end information of your real bass, like with synths?
Yeah. So the question is, like, how often do I need to, for the people on stream, how often do I need to use like a synth bass to reinforce the low end of my bass? I literally never do that, actually. I think one, you do have to be careful with phase sometimes with that. Just if it just so happens that the note that you played on the live bass has a destructive phase kind of relationship with the synth bass just for a second, that kind of stuff can make weird wavering low-end things happen. Also, if you're having to put a crossover into your main bass signal as well, and then layer that with the sub-synth, that can create like a kind of phase issue around there as well. Phase, I mean, I hate bringing it up, frankly, because it's that annoying thing that experienced people kind of, it's like homeopathic medicine where it's like, it's like, well, you can't hear it, but trust me, it's killing your mix, and that just never made sense to me. But there are some, especially in the low end, I do think you really need to be careful with phase, because the longer wavelengths you do get, certain notes you might find actually sound really out of tune, or rather, sorry, not out of tune, get really quieter when they're sung with a sub-bass. But what you can do, I think, is you can really focus on performance. So if you have the ability to, something that I've drilled throughout my time as a bassist is just getting that consistency, so that like my notes when I play them on the bass sound really even, and also they have the same quality, which is to say that the timbre of the pick is the same every time, the low end created is the same every time. This is where that thing I was talking about before about how you pick the string is really crucial as well. If you look at the DI, I've worked on my performance so that you will see like every note has like a really nice kind of shape to it. It's not, none of the notes have like a spike and then very little information afterwards, which tends to happen if you choke a note by the way that you're catching the pick with the string or the way you're fretting the note. That to me is the single best way of getting like a clean low end, is actually that the performance in the first place has like a really, really consistent sound to it. And then you can use multi-band compression to compress the low end, sometimes in like 2 parts as well. That can be quite useful. So the kind of like, I don't know, like 175 down to like 100, and then the sub bass separately, so that they can kind of just keep everything really flat with like a soft knee as well, so it's kind of constantly riding and just holding those low frequencies in a very, very consistent spot. That tends to do the trick for me. The other thing you can do, which is quite useful actually, having just told you about all the phase issues with high passing, but like if you high pass your bass DI, not super high, but at like 60 hertz or something, and then boost the low end in general, let's say 100 hertz and down, you can get the bigness, but there isn't the kind of sub-information that might make the compressors and the amp react in kind of weird, squirrely ways. Sometimes that can really help with the clarity of the low end. It's actually, yeah, just making sure you're shelving off the sub-frequencies, but making sure there's still plenty of general low end in there as well. Does that make sense? Cool. One final thing I'll say is that there's a rad plugin by Sound Radix called Pi? Yeah, it's called Pi, that basically corrects phase between instruments, because if you have a synth kick and a synth bass at the same time, both made from synthesized waves, you can end up where they actually kind of cancel out. This basically eliminates any phase crossover between things. If I were to be layering a bass with a sub bass, I'd probably choose to use that. Not auto align, which is kind of time alignment and a bit of phase rotation. This thing is just in real time, constantly making sure there's no phase cancellation. That could be a really good tool. Cool. Yeah.
Transient problems like the fishy slap sounding when using neck pickups, because I did a workaround to have a high shot on my DI, because on a DSP based pedal the transient go just glitching through,
Right.
because the latency is too long for them to catch it.
I see. So the question is about the kind of fishtailing sound. Are you playing a J bass by any chance? Or? Really?
Thing about the
Yeah. Weird. I don't know is the answer, because I don't often encounter that, not with these basses. And I would have said that I think the times that I notice it is when I'm playing like a Fender style bass where the pickup has the magnetic rod sticking up, pointing at the string, and then if the string hits that, that's the classic kind of fishtail sound. I don't tend to get that with these kind of covered pickups to the same degree. I mean, what pick are you using? Are you using a thin pick or are you using a thick pick?
0.6.
Okay. You're going to tell me everything's the same. Yeah, okay. This is making it difficult.
Lightning fast.
Yeah.
And I did this workaround with the anagram, like having this high shot on the DI, And it's okay already, but I want to know how do you deal with that.
Yeah, so I mean, just again, so the streams can hear, you're talking about being able to fix that issue, or not having that issue when working with analog compression. Seems like the compressor can even that out, but using digital compression, it gets through somehow. But high shelf boosting, did you say? Or high shelf cutting? So just cutting some high-end... Okay. Okay. Well, it's not a real-time solution, but I would suggest using a limiter first. I think in general, like something that I've adjusted in my mixed approach is like to always think about the envelope, like the attack, the transients versus the sustain first before doing any EQing or processing that isn't dynamics based. So I find limiters really useful just on source tracks, and that's something you'll find is kind of built into analog work a lot of the time. So if you were recording a DI to tape, it's naturally not going to be able to replicate those really sharp spikes. Or if you're recording through a preamp that's close to the point of saturation, it's going to get naturally saturated off. So I kind of almost feel like it's a 2026 solution to making things sound more analog, weirdly, using the most digital tool possible, like a look-ahead limiter. But unfortunately, they tend to have quite a lot of latency if you try and play through them. I don't know. How high is the action on your bass? Quite low.
Yeah.
Right, yes, yes.
Well, I did everything. I also use custom gauge strings to deal with my custom tunings.
Okay.
And I calculated them with the Dingwall, with the Dingwall chart.
Yeah.
So I have a 0.112 for a low D and a 0.147 for a low A.
Okay.
So it's kind of the best of the physics of engineering.
Yeah.
So I did everything already.
You've done everything. Maybe you just need to mess it up. Just use entirely inappropriate gear and see what happens. I don't know. I mean, the last case scenario, you could just lower the pickups a little bit as well, right? Is that where the sound's coming from, like making contact with the pickup?
Yeah.
Maybe just lower the pickups a little bit.
I can do it.
Yeah, I mean, it might sound a little bit different, but you might at least be able to lower it enough to get around that issue. We'll see when I plug in the NG3 if it starts happening. This will be pretty funny.
Solution, but
Okay.
I just
Yeah, I've not come across that before. All right. I feel like different.
Differences when you approach the bass sound in studio compared to live, and how do you incorporate or how do you use compression in each case?
So the question is about if there's a difference between my live and studio bass tones, and I mean the short answer is no. I think the closer everything actually, like even just how I play, is to how I play when I sit in front of my studio monitors, like that level of comfort and relaxation is like what I think generates a really good performance in these kinds of situations. If I may quote Philip over there at the sound desk, he did say that this is the least he's ever had to do to a bass sound, right? Because I mean, this is a studio bass sound in a box, basically. So if the sound guy has calibrated the speakers, then hopefully it would translate pretty well. In terms of compression, I just like loads of compression, frankly. Like I used to do this thing where I wouldn't compress the sound so much before distortion, but now I just bung it through loads of compression. It's great. It means you can use a little bit less gain. I mean, what you're trying to do with distortion or compression is bring up the sustain, bring up the overtones, because that's the stuff that helps the bass sound cut through the mix. So compression brings out all of that detail, brings out all of the harmonic interest, makes the notes sound really goopy and long. And I can do more noodly stuff and it still comes through nice and loud. So there's compression built into the chain. Again, this version 2 capture thing's amazing. I know I'm not even here on behalf of Neural, but it is great. And then there's a further compressor on after, in just using the Neural DSP compressor as well. So just take it to the next level. And it does have like that. There is like quite a kind of compressed front end, but it feels kind of tight. That's just compression. Compression's great. Yeah, it's like butter in cooking. It's just like, oh man, so unhealthy, but so good. Yeah.
Adding on to that, actually 2 questions. First of all, what string gauges do you have on this one with
Yeah.
the drop C?
So this, I literally just changed the gauges before we started. I have a, it's a 5-string set. So it's 45 to 130, Dingwall brand nickel strings. But I substituted the 4th string for the 5th, so this has got the 130 on the bottom, which is a bit tight for drop C. But the next song I do, I'm going to drop that a lot. So I wanted something that could kind of hang. It's actually surprisingly, as soon as this starts to wear, it's probably going to sound quite dull. But if the action's set right, and so it's still got that nice little clang off the string, it can sound pretty bright, even though I've got it under a lot of tension. Yeah, it's a 130. Cool. Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Yeah, then how do you set your compression? What's the attack timing and stuff like that?
Timing on compression, not as fast as it can go, but not much slower. Oh man, compression is, should we do the next couple of hours on compression? I think what's really key is also understanding how the knee works. These days in general, I'm quite liking a softer knee and a lower ratio. So basically, all right, you're driving a car and someone puts a wall in the middle of the road and you just smash into it. That's a brick wall limiter, right? Like you do not go through the wall. You could have something which is more like a net that catches you gradually and doesn't allow you to go too far. That's like a regular compressor with a ratio that's slowing you down once you go past that point, but not entirely causing you to stop hard. A knee would be a bit like, before you reach the net, there's a magnet on your car that's opposing a magnet on the net. So as you get close to it, it actually starts to push against you. Basically, the knee starts to apply compression before the threshold, and it gradually ramps up into the full compression you've set. So what can be really nice about that is if you have a softer knee, more of what you're playing is being compressed. Like even the soft stuff is getting some compression rather than it being more binary, like none of this is compressed, there's a spike, oh, that gets compressed. This is like actually everything is living within this kind of magnetized, weird mind thing I've come up with, where you're just constantly working the compressor a little bit. And that can help things to sound really even and have like a consistent attack as well, because the compressor keeps being triggered on every attack apart from, instead of like only just on the ones which go above the threshold. So yeah, not the fastest attack, maybe something like sub 10 milliseconds, maybe 3 to 5 to 8 or something, dependent on the compressor. And then not the fastest release, because I don't like it when it kind of feels like it's pumping up too much underneath, but not slow either. So sorry, vague answer, I'm afraid. Cool. That one last question and I'll do more playing. Yeah.
Compression and overtones, how do you handle string noise when changing positions with your left hand?
I mean, there will just be a little bit of it, but also it's just something that you can train, At least on a bass, you're generally playing one note at a time. It's worth having a soft touch with your hand to be able to do that. I'm trying to think what moments have big string changes, but I guess, I don't know, I always kind of do that. Like, that kind of thing, like where you're moving around and kind of keeping your fingers in quite close contact. I think it's just about slightly overpowering the string noise by making sure that you're picking pretty hard, and having a light touch in general, Like sometimes it is just like it just gets buried in there, Obviously right and left hand muting is pretty crucial. I think that's something which helps if you come from like a high gain guitar background. You're probably quite used to kind of muting off the strings you're not using. Yeah, I don't know. Generally don't find it too much of a problem. Yeah, like I wouldn't say I'm great, say on an acoustic guitar. I'm fairly squeaky. I think there's certainly people that are incredibly smooth on that, and I don't find the basses anywhere near as kind of tricky as that. Right, shall I play another song? Oh, Gina, come on. All right.
Another day pulls me down to my knees and holds to get to my
Thanks, guys. So that's a song called Prayer Position, which it's one of the few songs where I actually contributed quite a lot in Periphery. I think people have the impression that I did quite a lot of writing. I didn't really, but that song was a song that I had quite a lot to do with. If you guys are familiar with the song Loon that finishes this particular album, Periphery 3, the guys were basically in Misha's sitting room writing that, and I was, for some reason, doing this. I wasn't part of Loon. So quite different vibes as well, which is interesting. This song, the first thing that I had actually was not in triplet, like this is in a triplet feel, like a da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But the first idea I had actually for this was the same notes, but it was in straight time. And the problem was it's a bit of an awkward tempo, so it was like whatever it is. I can't hear it that way anymore now, actually. But that tempo is just like really plodding. If you imagine like what's the drummer going to do there, it's like really hard to kind of spice it up. And hard to play any faster than that. And in Periphery, we'd always have just like this dumb, like if something wasn't working, it would just be like almost a joke, like, oh, try it in triplets. And this is like one of the few times where we were actually like, oh, wait a minute, that's actually quite cool. So that kind of unlocked this song, because I had that main riff and then I didn't really have much more for it. But it kind of explains a little bit some of the weird syncopations that you get. I mean, sometimes it's just a really nice thing to do, like try it in a different timing. I do think that playing really syncopated stuff in triplets can sometimes be harder than doing it in straight time. Like the chorus in this song, which doesn't sound very fun on its own, but that. Hey, come on. Like to be able to do that. So it's 5 against 3. Too. I'm going to find that bit and I'm going to do it just hitting the strings. Wasn't making any noise. Let's try that. I found that quite difficult to kind of lock in. There's various points where there's something about the slippery nature of triplets where like I'd want to just nudge it over onto the actual downbeat, and actually there's like when you get those ones on the open, there's like the first one is like the very last triplet of the bar, and it just like skips over the one, and that's a particularly tricky one to get the timing just right, to not rush it or slow it down. So that was always, that was quite an odd thing to get used to for me. And what I would do is I'd drill it just like I did there. I might set up just a drum loop, just kick drum, maybe snare backbeat so I don't lose my way, and some kind of click count, maybe starting with like constant sixteenths, or rather triplets, 8-note triplets, and then a kick drum doing that accent. And I'd just sit there and practice just hitting the strings like that, kind of separating the timing from the notes. And that would be how I'd work through a lot of kind of odd tempo stuff. So I think, this song seems to have, I don't know, something happened to it when it came out that it just kind of caught people's attention, which is, I probably owe quite a lot of my career to that one bass playthrough of this song, because this song was definitely like a deep cut on the record. It wasn't a single or anything like that. But it's one that I still like to bust down, keeps my chops up. Yeah, cool. Any questions about prayer position or not? If you've got a question about prayer position, let's take that. If not.
No, not specifically about the sound, but about timing and stuff. But I can ask it later.
No, please.
Personally, I don't know if you count by playing or time stuff, but I just throw counting out the window. I just go by the groove and like memorize it, like muscle memory.
Yeah.
How would you do it?
So the question's about like whether I'm counting to myself when playing in on time. Typically not. Yeah, I think certainly like I'm not counting the number. I'm not going like 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, what I am often doing is in my head I'm subdividing it. So I might be hearing in my head like something like that in my head, but I'm not necessarily keeping track of where in the bar I am. I think most of the people that I know that are really adept at playing in odd time signatures, it's like you just kind of learn the phrase and the you kind of stop thinking about it as an odd time signature. And I think that's the case with me. Like, I'll often think of it just like, oh, there's just like an extra beat on the end of this bit, or something like that. Or like when I played Absalom, there's after I do the tapping, there's kind of like a Hertha kick thing, like, and I just know how many like I do. I just know that, you know, and there's like an extra beat on the end. So like I've kind of learned it as like I'm just doing that 3 times, and then 1 on the open, and then 4 times on there, and then there's an extra beat, and I'm done. So I'm kind of compartmentalizing it down quite a lot. You know, I'm certainly not counting, because at that point, is that what, a 5 against 4 thing as well? Like I know where the backbeat is, but I'm not going 1, 2, 3, 4 as I go through it. I think if you feel uncomfortable with a time signature, then breaking it down into 2s and 3s is the way to get around it for me. Like, so you'd hear a 5 as a 2 and then a 3. Like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, or a 3 and a 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And then you can just stack 2s and 3s together to get something, typically a 3 on the end. And what I think is quite interesting about that, I was trying to think like what's so cool about like a quintuplet groove, which is kind of like what I'm doing in prayer position there, if you kind of phrase it in 5s. I think if you think of it as like you're actually playing like a straight beat and then a swung beat, it's not really true, but you're doing like 2/16, let's say, and then 3, and that 3 you can kind of think of in your head as like a duck, da duck, da duck, da duck, like that's like a kind of swing feel. So it's like you're doing a straight and then a swing, straight swing, and that can be quite a cool way to feel it sometimes. Like if I were to do that same like, if I was to add 1 on the last hit of the 5, like. You can kind of get the sense of it's like straight swing. No, I can't do that until. And I think it is that kind of like, is it straight, is it swung thing that can be really quite fun about playing in odd-time signatures. But yeah, break it down into 2s and 3s, and most things are manageable. When, if need be, just go like, oh, and then it's just got an extra bit on the end, and just learn that. You know. Sorry, was there a follow-up?
Right question.
Okay.
So it's the low string is in G.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your sweet spot for scale length and like string gauge for low string?
Yeah. So the question is about what's my sweet spot for scale length, and yeah, I mean, I think this works really well for me, like a 130. I think this is because the new set's good to 130 on a 4-string. So the 4-string Dingwalls are not as long on the bottom string. They're the 4 strings from the top of one of those. So this ends at 36 1/4, where that goes on to 37. That feels really good to me. You could arguably go higher. It's always a trade-off as you go thicker and thicker with the string, like the less kind of mobile the string is and the less kind of brilliant and kind of zingy and shiny it sounds. So I will tend to err on the side of lighter. Obviously here I'm using this one set of strings to do quite a, like, from a C all the way down to a G. Sorry, was that really loud? Yeah. But yeah, I probably wouldn't want to go much thicker than this. I tend to, most of my basses are like, I have the 6-string set full, like the 45 to 170, and then I'm just like picking and choosing which one's closest to what I want, rather than having lots of custom gauges. But I do like to, you know, work on the setup of the bass, like I described at the start. That can go quite a long way. I could maybe use the same gauge, maybe raise it a tiny bit just to prevent it from flapping quite so much. But yeah, I probably wouldn't go much higher than like a 140 for that, which on the Dingwall scale is definitely not what it would recommend. It would definitely recommend like a 160 or something, which for me, like tonally starts to change too much. Cool. Is there a question from someone that hasn't asked one? You haven't asked one, have you?
Sorry, I have a complete other question.
Okay.
As an old man like me,
Okay.
I was socialized bass players like Jaco Pastorius or Jeff Bruce and others in that age. As far as I was listening to you, I have the opinion now it's the most important thing is rhythm and noise, and not bass playing. So can you have 5-string, 6-string bass basses here? Do you also play melodies on the bass to the songs you play?
Yeah. So the question is about, I guess, kind of the evolution of bass, or rather the difference in the use of bass guitar with the kind of classic jazz greats like Jaco Pastorius through to what I'm doing, which, as you put it, is rhythm and noise, and that's probably quite a good way to put it, actually. I think it's a fundamentally different thing I'm trying to do here. What I'm trying to do here is kind of like part guitar, part synthesizer. Like have the clean low end like a sub-bass synthesizer, and then have the really grindy, noisy element that blends with the rhythm guitars to create this kind of larger-than-life. Yeah, I mean, it's shaped noise, basically. I'll roll with that. It's a really different thing. Like, do I ever sit and play? Sometimes, but bass is not my first instrument. I came up on guitar. I do sit and noodle on guitar. My approach to bass, and actually the thing which I really love about it, is I see it, for me, the way I use the bass, it's more like carpentry. Like, it's about the joy of doing, like, precise work to slot something together and to create something which is a really supportive item of furniture, let's say, and less about, like, having a creative mark that's visible. It's not sculpture. It's functional carpentry and, like, really taking a lot of pleasure and kind of purpose in just trying to do every single stroke as cleanly and accurately as possible. And that's a completely different thing to what you're talking about with those amazing bass players. Yeah, so, but all the respect to them. And again, yeah, when I play guitar, it's still mostly rhythm and noise, but it's a bit more creative, yeah. Cool. All right, any other, yeah.
I was wondering, earlier you said you don't usually worry about sonic space between guitar and bass because you're playing an octave lower, but what about cases where we're in 8th string range and there's not really an octave below the guitar anymore, and the guitar and bass are basically fighting, and it's just a pile of mud.
Yeah, so the question is, based on the earlier question about me saying that there's plenty of space for me because I'm an octave lower, what happens when guitars are tuned ultra low and I'm in the same octave, which does happen sometimes. I guess I just don't see it as fighting. I see it as like being an awesome team, you know? It's like teamwork. We're making a sound together. We're kind of layers of this sound in the same way you might layer a Rhodes with an acoustic guitar or like 2 synth sounds or something like that. It's not about fighting. It's about having complementary tones. Actually, so like, as a philosophy when I'm mixing, I always found it a bit weird when people talk about like, kind of like, people talk about Tetris, sonic Tetris, making everything fit in its little... I've never once thought about mixing like that. I'm thinking about making tones that are complementary, maybe a bit more like a painter is choosing a color palette that works well together, and they're not trying to just fill gaps in the color. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say is that like if you have a really nice landscape of painting of the Bavarian landscape outside and it's done with really earthy tones, and then the painter used like a neon orange on something, you'd be like, well, that doesn't fit. We should dull that down a lot so it fits in. And that's a lot more how I see mixing. Like I'm trying to make things just feel like they actually belong in one place. So yeah, all that to say, I negate your violence of the fighting bass and guitar with pure love and collaboration. And actually, oftentimes when the guitars are tuned really low, they're often like a baritone scale. Maybe it's quite normal now for people to be using like the bass sixes or stuff like that have a very kind of quirky, almost like P-bass-like sound, actually. And sometimes that works just beautifully with the bass, and I don't need to change anything. They just kind of come down into the range, but naturally have a tonality that is different and cool. All right. Yeah.
Still coming back to that question again, if you're going lower and lower, still fundamentals are getting more and more equal, and even though you're trying to achieve the complementary of it, still somehow, as you already mentioned, you got phase issues, all this stuff, and particularly the new music stuff like that, you name it, Bad Omens, Sleep Talk and all those guys, they are going lower and lower and lower, especially also adding up with C stuff, and it's getting more and more dense. So still, even though, let's say you're not liking this Tetris approach, still, in the end, it is like that, right, isn't it? So how are you making the space in such dense mixes where you have like, I don't know, 10 tracks in some of the same frequency areas still? So how are you approaching it? Are you then saying, like you mentioned earlier, you're going with the mindset that, okay, this instrument will be multi-band compressed there because I don't need it that much in regard to transients and rather have the other ones poking out? Yep. Or are you making cuts, dynamic EQ? So how are you bringing, let's say, how are you achieving that the painting approach even though you have so many things in the same area?
Okay, yeah, so summarizing the question is about like how do you just make space? Like there's a trend in music it's been going on for a while of just so much production, so many guitars, so many bass, everything, so many bass. Yeah. And how do I deal with that? I think control of dynamics is how you deal with that. Like once the things fit on the same painting, you know, color-wise, I don't actually think about that like consciously when I'm mixing, but that's an analogy. I think dynamics are where it comes to, and actually just like the more things there are, inevitably the more you need to squash down the dynamics of stuff so that it is pinned in volume, because that thing we were talking about with depth earlier about like this difference between loud and quiet, if there's so much going on, then a little bit of quiet just means it's kind of going out of earshot, you know, kind of hidden behind everything. So the answer which purists don't like is often just to limit and compress the crap out of everything until it's just the waveform is, you know, like a distorted guitar, because then it's constant, and you can have it at just enough volume to hear it, and you don't lose it because it's constant against everything else which is constant. Yeah, multiband compression. I don't use multiband compression that much. I used to more. These days, I quite like, for example, it's a similar concept, but a Bloom by Urk Sound. Have you come across that? It's like a dynamic EQ kind of thing. These are the guys that made that plugin Soothe, if you know that one. Amazing company, actually. But their plugin Bloom is really good for controlling resonances in a musical way and just kind of shaping things to work well. And I quite like these automated approaches because I find if you're doing like notch EQs and stuff, then inevitably you are taking out good information some of the time. But yeah, pinning the dynamics is honestly huge. And just getting the overall frequency balance kind of right helps. If you listen to something like a Bad Omens mix, there's a lot that's being sacrificed for the vocal, actually. If you pay attention, like the bass doesn't have much of an audible grind to it in those mixes. It's more of like a sub-element. It's not in the stereo field. It's not right here, right where the vocal and the snare is. And the cymbals are quite quiet as well. Again, allowing the voice to be bright, like to be loudest in the bright area of the mix, so it can cut through. And I find the way that I mix is probably less deferential to the voice. Like I like the voice to be audible, but I'm not sacrificing the tonal quality of like the bass or whatever it is to try and get that right. But I might use something like side chaining, so that when the vocal's singing, something else might be getting ducked with a multiband or something like that, if I'm really trying to cram a lot of stuff in there. Yeah, and it just takes a lot of repetition, frankly, like just listen to the same section and just tweak. Small changes can go a long way. I'll take a question from you.
Yes, I have a composing question.
Yeah.
How do you and guys in Periphery understand that riff or song are enough good to stop developing and going down straight in, in arrangement and so on? So what's your approach and how do you find that's right?
Yeah, so the question's about like, how do you know when you've gone deep enough on a musical idea? Like, how do you know when you've developed it enough? And referring to Periphery particularly. I mean, I'll say it's a struggle for everyone. I think I'm going to use this as a segue into the next thing I'm going to play, actually. So there's a band called Sixth. Do you guys know this band, Sixth? Yeah? Sixth are like my favorite band ever, and they're also everyone in Periphery's favorite band. And I think they frankly like are what pushed me into doing a production career, because I didn't feel up to the songwriting skill that they had, because the complexity that they could like squeeze into something and like the efficiency and just like the brilliant rhythm and melody and harmony is like everything that Periphery was aspiring to be as well. So I mean that in a negative way, like I literally was like, well, I just can't hang with that. I'm just going to do minute-long sound clips and work on how it sounds instead. But I think as a theme, so I do work with lots of artists who write complex music. A lot of them come into this issue where things get kind of too overworked, you know? They try and make things a bit too convoluted because they're not really sure where they're heading with it. And I think in general, when you're going through any creative process, it's a really good idea to kind of design in advance, like what you're trying to make. So like, what I mean by that is like, just to freestyle in your head, just be like, you want to make like a really heavy song, and I feel like it would be really cool if it was like, it started like with a really gentle build, and there was something really kind of an evil chord progression, and like these are just ideas. I don't have any music in my head, but like, and then it'd be cool if we went from that into like actually something that was like in a major key, but it was really notey, and then like just literally plan out in your head abstractly what you think a cool song could be. Or like, if I'm doing a product demo, I might go like, okay, what would the best guitar pickup demo be? Or it would probably have a riff like this, and it would have a riff like that. And what I mean is I'm kind of designing what are the elements which are going to make up this song, and I'm thinking with intention about what the whole point of the song is in the first place. You might choose to use a piece of art as an inspiration, or the structure of a book, or something like that. You know, you could use the heroic journey or something as a structure of like what could be the trajectory that this song goes through. And then what you're doing is you're filling in these sections. And then, yeah, sure, you might spend your time refining and working on stuff. But you know you finished it when it's finished, you know, because you knew what the whole thing was designed to be. And obviously you can be open to it, kind of detouring off that as you find cool things. But what I'd say is really helpful to creativity in general, or learning, like this band Sixth, I had to fill in for them and their 20th anniversary of this record that I absolutely love, I'm going to play a couple of songs from. I needed to learn quite a lot of material. This is related, I promise. I think if you start with a bird's eye view of everything, so like if you start actually with a sketch, so again to use a painter analogy, like a painter will typically start with an outline of what it is that they're doing, a rough outline, and then they'll fill that in. They don't go like centimeter by centimeter trying to make everything 100% detailed, and they never go back and kind of finish working, like they're completely finished with each square centimeter before they move to the next one. They have like a whole idea of the thing, and then they're filling in the detail. I think if you're trying to compose, that's a great way to work. If you're trying to learn material, like the Sixth, what I did is I didn't try to get every bit, every bar perfect in progression. I tried to get the big picture. I knew these are the bits that are hard. I'm not going to play something wrong over them. I'm just going to leave them out when I'm playing along. And then over time, I can fill in that detail up until like a couple of days before the gig. It's like, I know there's like 2 or 3 things across the whole set which I still don't quite have refined. I can just work on those, and then it's done, you know? So I think that approach of designing from the start what the project is going to be can help with that feeling of like, I've just kind of freestyled this random thing, and I don't know if it's good enough, and like if I can convolute it more. And unfortunately, sometimes those things end up kind of being directionless sometimes. You know, they didn't have like a creative intent. I'm not saying that's the case with your music, but I see that sometimes happening where like, these are cool riffs in the same tempo range and like key changes that work, but like it's not like an entity of its own that kind of has a purpose and makes sense throughout. Does that make sense? It felt quite abstract, but I don't know if that yeah?
In periphery and your career, and which took a lot of effort to be done.
Yeah, so prayer position, honestly, was me so much squeezing the blood out of a stone trying to get this thing, because I felt like it needed to be so complex and sixthy, actually. That main riff is like pure sixth worship. And I felt like I kind of had to live up to this complexity, and I was very much just like creatively tense. I don't know how to describe it. And it was really tiring. And I'd do like one bit and I'd just be like, oh, all right, that's it for now. I'm going to come back to this later. I'm happy with it as a song, but I feel like I could have been way less stressed about it, you know, like, and been way, like, just enjoyed the process a lot more. And the nice thing with prayer position is like those moments that were tough, I had like a genius songwriter like Misha to lean on, to like throw ideas or program a drum pattern or something like that. It's harder when you're working on your own. As for something that would just come really easily, I mean, like I do a lot of product demo stuff, and that always tends to come really easy, but that's not very convoluted music most of the time. Trying to think of a good example for you from my own work. The truth is I don't compose very much. But it's something which I'm bringing into basically like everything I do, frankly. You know, like even preparing for this and thinking about how I think a lot of my career I've just tried too hard, like frankly. It's like therapy, isn't it? Like in terms of like how I play the instrument, like playing in quite a tense way, in terms of how tight I felt about how the performance needed to be, how much I was like analyzing the timing. And I've realized there's a lot to be gained once you've got the skills, like once you have the ability to actually kind of not gripping quite so hard and just kind of letting it flow as it will. And I found that to be just like a way more happy way to live and to create as well. So maybe that will be useful to you. Yeah? Shall I play another song? I feel like I was talking about Six, so I'm going to play this song. And this song is, I need to retune the whole thing actually. What's really cool about this song is this is how I learned to slap and pop, but not on bass. it's a song called Summer Rain, and the first riff, and it kind of comes back, the whole band is slapping and popping. And I didn't know how to slap and pop in 2006, but I went and had a one-on-one lesson with Pin, one of the guitarists in the band, and he taught me, which is funny because the band, when I told them that recently, they told me he's by far the worst slapper in the band, so that's kind of funny. But that was where I learned to slap and pop, was actually on guitar with this song. And it was kind of just like, because I had that in my toolkit, that when we were recording Periphery 2 and there was that song Make Total Destroy, where I was like, well, I can slap. I could like slap a pattern over that. So, you know, this song is literally the genesis of that. Something that's interesting is like I hadn't learned to play it on bass until recently, knowing that I needed to fill in Sick for James. And it's quite a different animal on bass. When I learned to slap on guitar, I learned to slap with this kind of like more flea-like, like hands coming from above the strings, and my hands kind of more like a thumbs up, you know. Whereas you see, well, actually it's thumbs up the other way too, but like you see lots of slappers have got the bass a bit more high, and they're kind of slapping from below the string. That's what makes sense when you're playing Summer Rain on bass. But when you're playing on guitar with the strings bunched together, it's actually a bit easier to approach it from here. So. Make Total Destroy pretty much needs to be played with a more guitar-y technique from above, but I had to almost kind of learn to slap once more to be able to play this song with Sick recently, this way, to be able to make that work. So, yeah, let's play this song, Summer Rain. It's really technical. It's good fun. And it's in this octave tuning, so that the two strings are an octave apart, which is another reason I've got such a thick string down here. kind of feel like I want to play more, and the time is starting to run out. So I'm wondering, shall I just play multiple songs back to back instead of doing a round of questions? Yeah? Well.
Sound of the bass starting from the DI and then turning on each step of the signature chain.
So you want me to turn off and then back on again each chain? Unfortunately, it's really tricky because what I've got is basically a whole chain in one thing, so it just turns on and off on its own. But one sec, I'm going to grab another bass to be able to play more songs. I'm going to play more sixth stuff and use this bass for that. But yeah, the chain is based on my dark glass pedal. It's running through an EV-EQ and an outboard compressor, and that's captured with the quad cortex, kind of all in one. And then in terms of what's on there, there's just that, plus there's a compressor after it as well, which helps control. There's a couple of scenes which I'm not using with extra effects on them, and that compressor just helps it from kind of jumping around in volume too much. So yeah, unfortunately I can't break it down too much more for you. All right, I'm going to play another sixth song. This one's called Way Beyond the Fond Old River. It was called, the working title of it was 3316, for reasons that will hopefully become apparent if you try and count to the chorus. Oh. All right, let's do it. I really think that outro riff is one of the best riffs of all time. It's so cool to play that. Like, just so many notes. I mean, riffs like that are like huge influence on early Periphery. You guys might already know that, but if you haven't heard Sixth before, it's worth going and checking out. Death of a Dead Day specifically is like, yeah, Periphery in advance. Right, I'm aware we're actually really short on time, so what I'd like to do is play one more song, which I'm going to shift to the 5 string to use that one. And then, well, actually, no. Let's do some last questions, and then I'll play the last song, and that'll be at the end. All right? So, any questions while I'm doing that? Go for it.
How do you play so fast? But I think my left hand is kind of holding me down. So how do you connect like the picking fastness and your left hand?
Right. So the answer is using that synchronization at speed, basically. Yeah. That is one of the things that when I was talking about I play bass a bit like a carpenter. Like, I guess hand synchronization is like one of the things which I'm quite prideful about. Like, ooh, that was weird. I think that really is like at the crux of like sounding good on bass, because the slightest mismatch in synchronization kind of means that the note doesn't ring out properly. This strap is crazy, right? So, I mean, one of the nice things about bass is you're generally not playing chords. You're just focusing on one note at a time. And I think what you can really do is practice playing quite slow and just trying to make every note ring out really, really well. I know the play slow thing, I feel, is quite overdone by people. Like, if you want to play fast, all you need to do is play slow. I'm not saying that exactly, but I think that you can build up the muscle memory at slow speeds, just in terms of hand sync. So being able to kind of just like... just practice on making the changes happen exactly on time. I'm doing a terrible job of it there, actually. But yeah, it's a lot about just not having to press too hard, like working on the action of your bass so that it plays really well with quite a low action. And then just working on the timing between your two hands. I mean, there's nothing much to do apart from just kind of play. It's not something which I really kind of drilled, but oftentimes in Periphery songs, there's a lot of time where I'm just playing constant 16ths on something, just go. And yeah, that's really good practice, just learning, like, can you just kind of sustain that and keep it really, really even? And then there's other points where, yeah, I think when I first was playing bass in Periphery, I kind of made it my mission to pick every note, like just never have a hammer on or a pull off, which is a pretty stupid way to play, but I think it kind of helped train the hand sync, and then just recording yourself a lot as well. I guess that would be the other thing. I don't think, for the record, that anything about what I'm doing is like super fast. I don't think there's anywhere where I'm like in a Periphery song, you know, like, but it is just about kind of synchronization and just making sure that everything is always happening exactly in sync. And I think that is something you can train from playing slowly. I think a really good practice strategy in general is to try to not make mistakes when you're practicing. So slow it down to the point where you get it right, because then you kind of really strongly build up the muscle memory correctly, as opposed to kind of having this huge pool of experience of kind of having mis-synchronized your hands. So yeah, I guess always playing slow enough that it makes sense, and then just, you know, I've played bass in Periphery for quite a few years and recorded on all their records, and like, you just get really in the zone. You just kind of lock in with that technique. And I don't really think there's much that is like actually like challenging of like, can I pull this off physically? I don't think there's anything like that in the set. It's just, can I be relaxed and focused enough to kind of keep the synchronization going? I do think that kind of like just relax attitude is also quite a good way of ensuring that works. Like I mentioned really briefly earlier, I want this to feel like it feels when I'm at home, like when I was practicing for coming here to do this. Like, I want to be able to be mindful of like the nerves and the adrenaline making me want to grip my pick too hard, as it is, or play too fast, or kind of lose contact with the beat and just kind of zone in on the minutiae of what I'm doing. And I'm kind of making quite a distinct decision to kind of just feel that, but actually try and maintain the mindset like I'm just playing at home. I think that genuinely helps with performance in general. Does that help at all? I felt like it was quite vague. No? Was it good? Cool. All right, let's take a question from you. Yeah.
Already planning.
No. We have 4 pickups? Sell me on this idea.
I have this before that Sheldon, he has this new material, this
Right.
obsidian maple, which is kind of the same tonally as normal maple, but it looks just black.
Yeah.
And I think it would really look better.
Right. So the question, by the way, is about if there was going to be an NG4. The naming convention is a bit confusing because, yeah, NG4 to me makes me think it's a 4-string or has 4 pickups, and I guess you're not talking about it. You saying it could be more badass than that? No. No, to be honest, I think something he and I have spoken about for a while, and maybe will come to fruition, is doing like a more stripped down model, an NG1. Maybe not have any active electronics and just bring the price down, but have the same kind of build quality and everything. But that's something we've spoken about for years as a possibility, and yeah, there's no immediate plans for that. So, yeah, cool. Go for it.
Onboard EQ at all?
I do sometimes. Mostly if I'm recording like a single. If I'm doing an album, then there's just way too much risk that I'm going to like knock the knobs. And live, in a situation like this, I want to be able to walk up, plug into my pedal, and all I need to be on is the right pickup and have the volume all the way up, and it sounds exactly as it should. But sometimes live, I would, like with Periphery, like if for whatever reason, if the strings are going a bit dull, I might boost some presence on the DI, or if for whatever reason it was feeling a bit thin, or yeah, just based on what I was playing into, maybe I might shape that. But not a whole load is the answer. Yep.
Did you do the switch between playing with the pick and the slap?
Yeah. Yeah. So I didn't realize this was, because that first lesson I had with this guy from Sixth, he was like, oh, and it's really cool, you just tuck it behind your finger. And like, that was it. That was just, I was like, okay, I guess that's what you do. And then later people told me like, oh, are you doing that? So yeah, I'm holding it like this, and then I guess I'm kind of reaching over with my middle finger and grabbing it kind of within there. Does that make sense? So the middle finger's kind of taking it out of play, so I can do it. Then I've got my index finger free, and it's just tucked with my index, yeah. Yeah, I couldn't do like I could, but that pick would start to be digging in if I were to pop like with both fingers. And then to put it back again, it's just putting my thumb against it and putting my index finger back into place. So it's quite smooth. It's not very hard. I guess it just takes a few times, but yeah, I mean, I didn't think about it too much when I learned it, and if you don't, it'll probably be really easy for you as well. Yeah. Cool. You've done loads of questions, so I'm going to make sure some other people. Yeah, you're fine. Let's get you.
Question about your picking technique.
Sure.
Do you play against the strings or through the strings and get catched by the next string?
Right. So basically, about my picking technique, am I doing like a rest stroke? Like, kind of? Yeah, I am. So my pick is firmly buried. Like, so it's kind of gone. I'm doing this for your angle. So like, it's kind of going diagonally down, and then just completely buried there. Right. If I'm doing the constant 8, I'm not. I'm kind of buttering a slice of toast with my wrist. You know? Or sometimes, if I want to do it quite lightly, like in that Summer Rain song, I'm doing that on a high string, and I don't want it to be like, so I'm actually not using very much pick depth. And what I'm doing is I'm using my fingers on the body to kind of maintain my pick at a certain distance. And I'm just because in that situation, I don't want all that stuff I spoke about earlier about the pick depth and the gap. So the rest of the time, yeah, it's very rest strokey. And the movement is like you're trying to shake some water off your hand or something. Like it's that, and then my hand's going to that, and then I'm just limiting it, and obviously there's the impact against the string itself, which resists it. But that is the technique which I'm using to pick, is yeah, I'm kind of just flicking imaginary water. And it's, as I was saying before, it's not about the build-up, it's not about the run-up. It's about everything that happens basically once the pick is in contact with the string. So I can pick really hard from just there, you know, basically in contact. So yeah. Yeah, all good? Cool, yeah.
Just because we had a topic about maybe NG4 or not,
yeah.
Have you seen the video about the 8-string guitar with the 64 pickups?
No.
Like 8 pickups, but a single pickup per string on each pickup.
Okay.
With a built-in interface which allows you in the DAW to control each single string and, well, pickup position.
Right. Pickup position. Okay.
Yeah. Pick up each. what do you think about that from a production standpoint, where you can control every single position of the orchestra?
Ooh, okay, so the question is about, have I seen this 8-string guitar that has 8 pickups with individual pole pieces for each along the whole length, and you can then choose after the fact which you're using to sense the sound on each individual track. I mean, from a production, if you're actually doing the real thing with a client, like that's just way too much to mess with. Like, maybe in advance find like one cool setting, and then I might whip it out like, hey, you should check this out. This sounds really cool, set exactly like this, don't touch anything. But even like something like a Gibson grabber bass, you know, with a movable bass pickup. I think they're cool basses, but there's like, for me, there's one definite best sounding position for it. And as a product designer, I just wish that's the only thing, that's the position, you know, it doesn't have the movability. Which I guess they did with the reissue, right? The reissue Gibson grabber doesn't have a movable pickup. Weird. Yeah, so to speak to your 8-string, it's just too much for me, I'd say, that concept. Unless there's an incredible UI, like user experience that's related to that, that's very intuitive and quick, I would rather deal and kind of be fixed to the inherent limitations of a given instrument and the sound it creates as a result than have something that's kind of infinitely sculptable but require constant evaluating and managing. That to me is just, I don't know, who do you think they're marketing that?
It's just, I think, a development thing for a university or something. They were just trying stuff out, but they did try something like put distortion on low strings while you keep clean high strings, for example, and stuff like that.
Right, okay.
To see what you can do with it.
I mean, as an experimental instrument, sure. For a specific artist, sure, that has ideas for that, that would be what it's for me. Okay, I wouldn't feel good taking that to market and expecting people to buy it instead of whatever 8-string. Yeah, anyway, cool. Let's take you.
One question out of curiosity, even though we're doing a bass workshop today, you said you're coming from guitar, and I'm asking myself whether you approach the picking same way on guitar as well, that you have some, let's say, multiplex moving through the string with exactly the same approach, or do you have a different approach for picking there?
So the question is how different my picking technique is on guitar versus on bass. It was quite different, and over time I've realized that I do it better on bass than on guitar, actually. So my technique now on guitar is more like it is on bass. The principal difference is I'm not really palm muting, apart from just the odd moment. And palm muting instantly fixes your hand in position. You'll see when I'm playing bass, my hand's floating. You know, I'm not anchored. It's just kind of flying around. There's all this space between the strings, whereas on a guitar, it's like kind of need to have more of an anchor point. And as soon as you palm mute, you're limited by that. So I don't use super thin strings. Sorry, I don't use super thin picks, is what I was trying to say. I've actually come to like the opposite conclusion as to what pick I like. And it's a total anomaly, this pick. It's the Dunlop Flow Gloss, which is not the same thing as the regular Flow. It actually is a bit like the stubby picks. They're made out of a hard, almost acrylic like plastic, and they have like an indent for your fingers. It's like everything I should hate. And I think the texture of the material and the way it slices through the string is actually quite similar to the effect of the soft pick on the strings on the bass. So it's getting to a similar result by a completely different conclusion. And like I was mentioning about thinner picks exciting the fundamental less, I think what I really like about that pick on guitar is it actually brings quite a lot of body to the note, and it's a substantial difference. I think it actually highlights the fundamental more, which is something that I enjoy. So that's the pick I use. The technique is similar, scaled down, and initially, like the first few years I started playing bass, I mean, I didn't play guitar very much at all, and it just always felt like a ukulele when I picked one up and like didn't know what to do with it. So I think gradually it's kind of converged on a similar technique to my bass. All right, I think we've probably got like one last question, and then I should probably play a song and then wrap, right? Yeah, cool. Who's gonna get it? Oh, you.
I would like to ask you about your mix bus, more specifically the whole process, but do you have any specific philosophy when you go to mix a song? Because you have everything very polished on the tracks, everything sounds really, really well. Everything is upfront, and everything. I would like to ask you, what's the mix bus, the philosophy that you have for mixing, and everything is audible, and no fighting each other or the tracks and everything. I don't know. Can you?
Yeah. So the question is about like my mix bus when I'm mixing. I mean, the first thing people think about is mix bus compression. In the past, I would always mix into a compressor set with quite a fast attack. And what that would make me do is turn the fader of the snare up more because it's getting turned down by the compressor. But you'd get this effect of like the snare kind of ducking the rest of the mix. So it sounded quite clean because the compressor was mostly just compressing the snare. More recently, I've kind of shifted away from that after about 10 years of doing it that way. I've shifted to getting more of the mix in place before adding any compression, and then using like a slower attack, fast release, fairly standard settings, with a fairly low ratio and a softer knee, a bit like I was talking about in the start, keeping the whole mix in gain reduction more, which I'm really enjoying the kind of gluey aspect that does. I really like a plugin like Gullfoss by Sound Theory, which is like an automatic frequency leveling kind of thing, resonance suppression as well. And it just adds like a certain amount of balance to a mix that you can't really achieve because it's just automating so many points at any given time. But that's a subtle thing. Beyond that, I might be doing multiple stages of clipping. So I might be clipping the mix possibly before the compressor. So the compressor's seeing a very clipped waveform. And then I might use something which is more analog sounding that's saturating the mix, and you have to be careful with that because it might distort in a more audible way, and then I might have like just super hard clipping to achieve most of the loudness before the limiter. There might be an EQ in there as well if necessary, maybe high passing, or just doing some kind of broad adjustments that might be necessary. Does that answer? So I might high pass to about like 35 to 38 in the center, and I might high pass a bit higher on the sides, depending. Yeah. Cool. All right, that's it, folks. I'm going to play some music. I'm going to play, I have multiple options. I'm going to play, I think, Make Total Destroy, that song that, it's the most interesting on the bass out of the ones which I've got left. So let's do that. Let me know if you hear the fishtailing. Great, thank you very much, guys. This has been awesome.